Hi, everybody. Welcome. I think Zoom's catching up with everybody in the waiting room, but we'll give it a few more minutes as everyone connects to audio. My name's Colleen. I'm part of the battery programming team, and I'm so happy you all are here tonight. I've been looking forward to this event for quite a while. Just so you all know, you are on mute for right now, and that's just sort of helped to prevent any errant noise in the background, but we will do Q&A via chat. So if you have questions that come up as we go through the presentation, feel free to put them in there. We'll be answering them as we go through all of the content, and then we'll leave some time at the end, even if we go up right up to 7:30. If you want to stay and ask some more questions, all of our fabulous reporters from CalMatters are willing to stay and answer some more questions. So tonight we're here to talk about all the ballot propositions for California in this upcoming election. Obviously, there's a lot going on in the nationwide election that we're all keeping our eye on, but it's important for us as Californians to make sure we know what's going on in our own state and how these propositions will affect us. And so we've invited CalMatters, who is a friend of the Battery. They've actually hosted a lot of meetings, they told me, at the Battery before we had to close down in March, to run us through all of the ballot propositions this year. So I know they have a really stacked program, so I won't talk any longer, and I'm going to pass it over to their CEO, Neil Chase, to introduce the rest of the evening.
Colleen, thanks very much. It's great to be here. We are especially happy to be at the Battery. I don't know if you could say we were born out of the Battery, but pretty close. CalMatters was founded by Simone Cox, who's a member of the Battery, and a lot of the meetings and things that we've had and folks that we've worked with and people supporting us are affiliated with you. So it's great to be here. We have an ambitious agenda for tonight, so we'll get to it pretty quickly. CalMatters, for those of you who don't know, is a nonprofit news organization covering state policy and politics. And it was founded 5 years ago. It's our 5th birthday this just past summer. We're still waiting to have that in-person birthday party. Founded to fill the gap in coverage of state policy issues across California, especially in Sacramento, and help people understand the issues that are most important to them as the people who run and operate and pay for this democracy that we're all part of, the 5th largest economy in the world. And so we focus on policy issues, and every 2 years we try to sort out the most complicated thing that there is, which is California ballot propositions. Something invented, as far as we can tell, specifically to confuse voters and make our lives difficult and make CalMatters especially useful at certain times of the year. We have a team of reporters here, 12 ballot propositions, and almost as many people who'll be talking about them. And we're going to jump in and talk about each one. We have a little video that explains it, followed by the reporter who's on that beat, on that proposition, talking about it. And then we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A. The way we're going to do this to keep on schedule is ask that you, if you have any questions while the video is playing or while the reporter's talking, type your question into the chat. We'll be watching the chat box. And as each reporter finishes, we'll pull up a question or two out of the chat, ask it quickly, or summarize some of the questions if there are several, and see if we can't keep that moving to make sure we get done on time to respect the schedule here. But then at the end, if we have some time, and I'm sure we will, we'll be happy to stay and talk more about the individual propositions and the other issues. So with that, I'd like to introduce our co-founder and editor, Dave Lasher, who's going to talk a little bit about what we're doing tonight. Dave.
Hello, and welcome everybody. Thank you all for joining us. We're really looking forward to this. This is kicking off our election season presentation, where the state propositions are really in the wheelhouse of CalMatters. We cover the state issues, and we have a team of reporters on all the major topics in the state. So you'll be hearing from people who aren't just covering these propositions. They are full-time reporters on these issues about healthcare and education and other things that they follow throughout the year, and then do the research on these propositions, talking to the people and looking at the money and finding out what the impacts will be and what the background is. So there's a lot to cover. There's issues involving billions of dollars and the future of work and justice and housing and healthcare. So I think we'll get to it right away and try and, I feel a bit like a remote teacher. I'm learning how to do that. And a little bit like maybe a Zoom Cirque du Soleil. We're gonna jump around and try and cover a lot of ground. but I think you'll really like this presentation. Get out your notepad, get ready to take notes, because hopefully at the end of this you'll be able to go next to your ballot and learn what's there and what you think about it. So to keep things simple, just real quickly, we're not going to go in order of the propositions. We actually group them by topic in 3 different segments to make it a little bit simpler. So there's 4 propositions every 30 minutes, just to kind of simplify it. So we're going to get started with there's 4 justice-related ballot measures on the ballot this year. A lot of them inspired by the Black Lives Matter issues that have come up recently, and a couple put there by the legislature. So very timely issues. And we're going to start with Proposition 16 about affirmative action.
Remember California in the mid-90s? Tupac was the king of West Coast rap. California's governor supported denying public services to undocumented immigrants, and voters decided to end affirmative action.
It's that remote learning thing.
California has changed a lot since. Remember California in the mid-90s? Tupac was the king of West Coast rap. California's governor supported denying public services to undocumented immigrants, and voters decided to end affirmative action. California has changed a lot since then. Now, voters are being asked to rewind the clock and make affirmative action legal again, something that's the case in 42 states. And it boils down to this: do equal rights mean no group can have an advantage over another? Or is it about recognizing that forces informed by centuries of oppression make a colorblind legal framework impossible? Enter the heated debate over Proposition 16.
Hi, I'm CalMatters higher education reporter Michael Zinstein, and this is what you need to know about Prop 16 in under a minute.
Prop 16 would allow public agencies such as local governments and state universities to consider race, gender, and ethnicity as factors in hiring, contracting, and admissions. At UC Berkeley and UCLA, the state's most competitive public universities, enrollment declined for Black, Latino, and Native American freshmen once affirmative action was forbidden. There's long been a push to reinstate affirmative action, but 2020 forced many Californians to rethink systemic racism and how it keeps the playing field unequal, helping to put Prop 16 before voters. Supporters say reinstating affirmative action can help to undo generations of racism and discrimination. It would also let state agencies directly target groups of people who are underrepresented, like Black and women academics in university job openings. Opponents say California is already making strides that benefit people of color and women in college enrollment and public employment. So, vote yes if you believe California should again allow for affirmative action. Vote no if you don't. For more information on Prop 16 and everything on the November ballot, visit calmatters.org.
Now, Michael Zinstein, our higher education reporter.
Hi, everyone. So, after several false starts over the years, a ballot measure to overturn Prop 209 is back on the ballot after more than 2/3 of California state lawmakers this summer voted to give voters the choice: bring back affirmative action or keep it illegal in state affairs. Likely voters seem unenthused. A September Public Policy Institute of California poll found that just 31% of likely voters would vote yes on Prop 16. 47% said they'd vote no. That's a wider gap than in 1996 when the public voted to ban affirmative action through Prop 209. And back then, California was arguably more conservative and had a Republican governor. So zooming into that poll a little bit more, we see that there's a dead heat among Hispanics to vote yes or no on it. Among whites, a quarter would vote for it, half would not. And among all other racial groups, it's a statistical dead heat. The yes side argues once more people learn that affirmative action is meant to help traditionally marginalized groups, it'll gain more support. The no side says this is proof Californians don't want any racial preference. There's another poll. It came out yesterday. It's from Berkeley, and it shows a narrower difference of opinion. 1/3 of likely voters would currently vote yes for it. 41% would vote no, and a quarter are still undecided. What's interesting about this poll is that more Black, Hispanic, and Asian American voters support Prop 16 than those who don't. But the sampling error is kind of unclear. So, polls, right? The poll also shows that more white likely voters oppose Prop 16 than those who do. And we still have a lot of undecideds. This is all despite the yes side raising 13 times more money, 13 million, than the no side, 1 million. The gap was wider last week when the no side had just raised $200,000. Major funders for the yes side include Kaiser Hospital, philanthropist M. Quinn Delaney, LA Clippers owner Steve Ballmer and his wife, the ACLU, and various unions. On the no side, it's smaller donors, but more of them, including lawyer Gail Harriet and the organization that's been fighting affirmative action nationally, Students for Fair Admissions. More updates. The UC Board of Regents in September voted to affirm that no admissions, hiring, or contracting policy would have quotas or caps based on race or sex. They did that because federal courts have already ruled that to use affirmative action, a college needs to have hard evidence for why they would need it, and to use race in the narrowest possible way to achieve diversity. In a 2016 Supreme Court case, a Supreme Court justice said that the University of Texas policy is okay, their affirmative action policy is okay because race is a factor of a factor of a factor. Both sides, yes and no for Prop 16, cite data, often in need of more context, to defend their positions. There's also disagreement over how to frame the data. On one hand, Black and Latino student admissions to the UC grew fourfold since the mid-90s, but the percentage of Black and Latino high school graduates is lower than the percentage who gain admission to the UC. It's the opposite among Asian American students. And then also, if you look at K-12 data within the Asian American community, there are differences. The California Department of Education can tell you, can disaggregate between Filipinos, Pacific Islanders, and Asian American more broadly. And Asian American students more broadly get into UC at much higher percentages coming from high school than do Filipinos and Pacific Islanders. Some UC officials and researchers who back affirmative action don't actually think that Prop 16 will have a major impact on admissions, but rather in other UC ventures like contracting. Before Prop 209 passed, about 10% of UC's contracted businesses were minority owned. Today, it's closer to 2%. The state's newspapers are split on the matter. LA Times, San Francisco Chronicle, Mercury News, and East Bay Times have endorsed it. Some of the rationale, the LA Times wrote, if we want to live in a country that better reflects our national narrative of equal opportunity, we have to build it. The LA Daily News, Bakersfield, Californian, and Orange County Register argue against Prop 16.
Michael, I'm going to move to a question.
Okay, go for it. So sorry.
Yeah, no problem. No, it sounds good. That's helpful. One quick question, Michael. Does the proposition say that race and gender would be required to be considered, or how does it treat the?
It gives
what has to happen.
It gives institutions the option. And so it's not a requirement. And the Supreme Court, time and time again, has said that you can use race and gender in your hiring and in your admissions, but it really has to be narrowly tailored. And I kind of feel like both the yes side and the no side overstate the impact that affirmative action could have in California. If you read the Supreme Court cases, narrowly tailored, it's not going to be widespread.
Thank you.
Can't be.
Thanks very much, Michael. And now we're going to move to Proposition 17, which is about voting by parolees. And we're going to hear from one of our Capitol reporters, Elizabeth Castillo.
16 states and the District of Columbia allow people to vote once they're released from prison. Vermont and Maine even let people vote from inside prison. But California not only bars state prisoners from casting ballots, it also prohibits roughly 50,000 parolees from voting. This election could change that.
Hi, I'm CalMatters reporter Elizabeth Castillo, and I'm going to explain Prop 17 in under a minute.
Prop 17 would change the state constitution, allowing people on parole to vote. In California, people serving their sentences in county jails can already vote unless they're transferring to a state or federal prison or they're serving time for a parole violation. The proposition would also clear the way for parolees to run for office if they're registered to vote and haven't been convicted of perjury or bribery. Supporters say once people finish their term in prison, they should be encouraged to re-enter society, and granting parolees voting rights is one way to help people have a stake in their community. Opponents say parole is reserved for violent and serious criminals. Those who have been convicted of a murder, rape, and other violent crimes should wait until after they finish parole and have proven they're rehabilitated before they get to vote again. So, vote yes if you think people who have served their prison sentence but are still on parole should get to vote. Vote no if you think people should wait until after they've completed their parole to be able to vote. To learn more about this proposition and others, visit calmatters.org. For CalMatters, I'm Elizabeth Castillo.
Great. So go ahead and jump right in. Hi, everyone. So this bill landed on your ballot because our state legislature proposed, to change the Constitution. So it did pass with a 2/3 vote requirement, largely along party lines. No Democrats voted against it, though a couple of Democrats didn't vote at all, which has the same outcome. One Republican senator actually did vote in favor of the proposal. There's been about $700,000 raised in support of this measure and nothing really raised in opposition. That fundraising kind of pales in comparison to the money that's being raised in some of the other propositions. The governor announced that he supports Prop 17. Assemblymember Kevin McCarty, a Sacramento Democrat, is also in support. He's the lawmaker who authored the bill to get this on your ballot. He's argued that parole is designed to help people reintegrate back into the community. Also, John Legend, musician and coach of the NBC reality show The Voice, said on Twitter that he plans to vote yes on this measure as well. Supporters argued that if people on parole participate in civic engagement, they're less likely to commit a future crime. Those opposed to the measure include Crime Victims United of California. Another argument against the measure is that people who are on parole haven't completely paid their debt to society, and Prop 17 denies justice to crime victims. Something to keep in mind is that those on parole are largely people of color. One estimate states that Latinos and Black people make up 2/3 of the state's parole population. I mentioned this in the video, but once again, this is something that's definitely been brewing across the country. At least 16 other states and the District of Columbia already allow parolees to vote. In Vermont and Maine, there aren't voting restrictions on people who have been incarcerated. The Mercury News, East Bay Times, and San Francisco Chronicle editorial boards have written editorials to vote yes on Prop 17.
Very good. Thank you, Elizabeth. If there's any questions, please put them in the chat, or you can, send one to me privately too, David Lesher, and I will read it there. But anyway, thank you, Elizabeth. So next we'll move on to Proposition 20 about another justice measure about prison sentences. And this one you're going to hear from Ben Christopher, our reporter in the video, but then we'll hear from Miranda Lyons, our video reporter.
To make our streets safe again, we must target the most dangerous criminals.
Once upon a time, California was the center of the country's tough-on-crime movement. But over the last decade, California's attitudes have changed. We've reduced sentencing on nonviolent crimes, made it easier for inmates to get out on parole, and knocked some felonies, offenses that can carry serious prison time, down to misdemeanors, which might mean a short stay in jail, probation, or a fine. Some say those changes have gone too far, and they put Prop 20 on your ballot.
Hi, I'm Ben Christopher. I'm an election reporter with CalMatters, and this is Prop 20 in a minute.
Prop 20 would do four main things. It would reclassify a bunch of property crimes as wobblers, meaning they could be charged as either misdemeanors like they are now, or felonies. It would boost penalties for people who regularly violate the terms of their parole. It would require law enforcement to collect DNA samples from people convicted of some misdemeanor property crimes, and it would double the list of violent felonies that disqualify offenders from being able to apply for early release.
Under California law, domestic violence isn't considered a violent crime.
Wait, what did she just say? Can we stop the clock? Okay, so just to be clear, that doesn't mean domestic violence is legal in California, but if Prop 20 passes, it would be one more offense that excludes an inmate from the possibility of early parole. All right, go ahead. Supporters say Prop 20 closes dangerous loopholes in the law and that early reforms have resulted in an increase in property crime, which seems to be true. Opponents say this isn't the time to go back to the 1990s when tough on crime laws failed to reduce crime and trigger mass incarceration that ruined countless lives. Plus, the state crime rate is at a historic low. So vote yes if you want to increase penalties for some property crimes and make it harder for some inmates to qualify for parole. Vote no if you want to keep things the way that they are. To learn more about everything on your 2020 ballot, go to calmatters.org.
All right, so I'm Veranda Lyons. Let's start this with a timeline. So in the early 90s and 2000s, California had a lock 'em up, throw away the key approach to criminal justice. That led to overcrowding in state prisons, lawsuits, and eventually realignment under former Governor Jerry Brown. And realignment really just shifted the responsibility of about 30,000 offenders from state prisons to county jail. And that move really got the ball rolling for a lot of criminal justice reform. So soon after, you had Prop 47 passed, which reclassified some felony property crimes as misdemeanors. And then you had Prop 57, which increased the parole opportunities for some offenders. Now, does that sound familiar? It should, because that's largely what Prop 20 is about, rolling back the clock on Prop 47 and Prop 57. And just for reference, 60% of California voters supported Prop 47 in 2014, 64% supported Prop 57 in 2016. And after those laws passed, there was a significant, as can be expected, drop in California's prison population. California's use of pretrial detention decline, and Prop 47 led to decreases in racial ethnic disparities in arrests and bookings. At the same time, property crimes have increased, particularly larceny thefts. The California Grocers Association, Albertsons Safeway, they support Proposition 20 because, frankly, they've seen an increase in theft. As for violent crime, after steady increases in 2014, violent crime rates have been down since 2018. But it's still worth noting that California's crime rates are comparable to the low rates from the 1960s. Even after dramatic reductions in incarceration. Police say Prop 47 and 57 left too few tools in the toolbox to deter people from committing crime. They say repeat offenders need to be held accountable, and part of doing that is being able to charge their crimes either as felonies or misdemeanors. And that's why this is really on your ballot. Opponents say we don't need to go back to that lock 'em up strategy. It didn't work. It tore families apart, and it cost California a lot of money. So Governor Newsom and the Democratic Party are against Prop 20. California Retailers Association, Assemblymember Jim Cooper and Vince Fong are for it. On the yes side, they raised $4.3 million. $2 million has come from the California Peace Officers Association. $300,000 has come from David Nunes's campaign committee. On the no side, they've raised $5.7 million. $1 million has come from Governor Jerry Brown. 1.2 has come from the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. And it's worth mentioning that this proposition, Jerry Brown is known for his criminal justice reform. It's attached to his legacy as governor, and he wants to keep things the way they are. So that's why he's pouring $1 million into a no vote on Prop 20. As for newspaper endorsements, none of the top papers have support this measure. The LA Times hasn't come out with their endorsement on it yet, where they stand on it.
Great, thank you very much, Veranda. And just to tell everybody again, there's a chat button at the bottom of your screen, and if you click on that, you can type in a question on the side, and you can send it directly to me or to everyone, whichever one, and we'll get questions in. So one question, Veranda, that came up is about, it's actually about San Francisco. We've seen a rise in property crimes in the last couple of years, while crime is down overall, right? The question is whether there is any evidence that San Francisco is not pursuing property crimes or break-ins as much because the penalties are so minor.
I haven't looked into San Francisco, but from what I've read, they are pursuing these cases. The problem is that they're misdemeanors, and so people are caught and then they're back on the streets. And one of the things that this this proposition would do, it would get at these sort of theft rings. So a lot of these thefts are created because there is a larger network of you stealing things, and then you report to a larger gang or network of thieves. So this proposition would actually kind of address that. Now, how that plays out in different counties, I think, is to be determined.
Great. Well,
I got another question. Do you want me to talk about it, or I can just message them privately? We can keep going.
Yeah, okay. So now we're going to move to our fourth justice-related proposition. It's number 25, Proposition 25, and it's pretty significant. It's about cash bail, and we're going to hear from our inequality reporter, Nigel Dwara.
If you're arrested and taken to jail in California, you'll typically have two options: pay your bail or pay someone to bail you out. That means wealthy people get out of jail quicker, plead to fewer crimes, and because they have less incentive to take a deal, even get shorter sentences. Prop 25 would change that. But even opponents of the current system aren't sure Prop 25 is the solution.
I'm CalMatters reporter Nigel Dwara, and this is what you need to know about Prop 25 in under a minute.
Prop 25 would make California the first state to replace cash bail with an algorithm that assesses a person's risk of fleeing before trial. Former Governor Jerry Brown signed a law ending cash bail in 2018. Opposition, led by bail bond companies that make money off the current system, challenged the law. Prop 25 is the statewide showdown. Supporters say cash bail is classist, racist, and unfair. While awaiting trial, rich people go free, poor people don't. Opponents come in two flavors. The bail industry says changes will lead to more crime. The other side of the opposition agrees with the measure's supporters. The bail system is racist, classist, and unfair. But they say that while an algorithm can help you pick a song or a toaster, it shouldn't determine whether you get out of jail. So vote yes if you want the state to switch from cash bail to a risk-based algorithm. Vote no if you want the state to keep the system as is, or you're waiting for a better solution. For more information on Prop 25 and everything on the November ballot, visit calmatters.org.
Hi, so a lot to get to here. Let's establish some context first. There are two countries in the world that still have cash bail, the Philippines and the United States. So this is increasingly something that is going away in the rest of the world. The way it works right now is you're arrested, you're charged, and you're presented with bail. The median bail is about $50,000, which means for a bail bondsman coming in, that would mean you're giving them $5,000, which you're never going to see again. To get out, you either put the money up or you stay in jail. What that means is that nearly 2/3 of California inmates, and this is from 2014, but this still obtains, 2/3 of inmates were sitting in a county jail because they could not afford bail. That's from the Public Policy Institute of California. So it's expensive to taxpayers to keep them there. And then of course, they're also losing wages while they're in jail. In 2018, the legislature said, okay, we're gonna pass a measure, and they did, to end cash bail. It was immediately challenged by the bail bond industry, and now it's up for a public vote. So that's where we are now, is Prop 25. The new system that they're proposing is you would still be arrested, you'd still be charged, and you'd be held for pre-arraignment. But at the time that you're charged, there's gonna be a new release decision. It's more kind of like what federal court does. The judge runs the accused through a system designed by the state, which is the algorithm we talked about. And now there's judicial discretion, but there's also what they are proposing, at least, is an objective measure to say that people should get out or they should not. So you either be low risk, medium risk, or high risk. Medium risk is in the middle, high risk is not getting out. Low risk misdemeanors, they're going to be released. They're going to be released. In terms of the money for this ballot measure, $8.3 million for it, $8.3 million against it. It is supported by the bail bond industry. They put up all the money, and the Yes campaign has put up the $8.3 million for that goes forward. That makes it one of the most expensive justice measures of the four that you're listening to in this whole state, but nothing, of course, compared to some of the more expensive ones. Bail bondsmen say, look, everything is working okay. You can find a new system, but this shouldn't be it. And in 2018, our reporter, Laura Rosenhall, who's on this call right now, made the point in a story that this could be the issue that splits the left. That day is here. What's happened is a good chunk of the left, and we're talking about a lot of the leadership, so Anthony Rendon, the speaker, and Tony Atkins, Senate Pro Tem, Karen Bass in the House, Ted Lieu in the House, they're all in favor of it. But a further part of the Democratic Party, ACLU and civil rights folks say, wait a second, we should not be using an algorithm to determine this. This is not the way to go about it. And it'll continue to put people of color and people without means in jail for a longer period of time. That's it.
Thank you, Nigel. A quick question. We haven't seen any polling on this yet from any independent polling, right?
There's not been any independent polling. If we were going to judge it by newspaper editorials, across the board, yes, they're all in favor of it.
And another quick question, is the algorithm already been created, or who creates it?
The state is creating it. They haven't determined exactly who they're going to work with, but the state is going to create it once they actually have the motion behind it and they can put it together. So the state says it's going to be a state-created algorithm, and it'll have all the bells and whistles, and there'll be no problems, according to them.
Good. Great, thank you. I think we have one other question for Elizabeth.
Yeah, there was one that came in just after Elizabeth Castillo's session on people being able to vote. Elizabeth, the question was, to the opponents to this, have they offered any alternative, like an amount of time or some other qualification, like when would you be allowed to vote?
So that's a good question. The folks that are opposed are very adamantly for the idea that parole is part of your debt to society. Parole is part of the punishment. Parole is when you can prove that you've been reintegrated. So they adamantly believe that not until a person is totally complete with parole should they be able to vote. So that's the alternative. Just don't let them vote until they finish parole.
Great, thank you. So that's the end of our first segment. That's the 4 propositions that are dealing with justice-related issues. And now we're going to move to our second segment, and it's 4 propositions. 3 of them are about housing, and then one's about voting. So we're going to, housing obviously is a huge issue in California. There's 2 of the measures that really affect Proposition 13. So there's a lot at stake here on the ballot. We're going to start with Proposition 19, which is one of the property tax issues, and we're going to hear from Ben Christopher, our political reporter.
What do real estate agents, firefighters, baby boomers, and the Big Lebowski all have in common? Proposition 19. Hi, I'm Matt. I'm the housing and data reporter at CalMatters, and I'm going to explain Prop 19, the Portable Property Tax Break Initiative, in 1 minute. If you're having voter deja vu, here's why. In 2018, California realtors put a sweet baby boomer tax break on the ballot. Seniors who buy a new house would keep the same lower property tax rate they would have owed on their old house, based on what they originally paid for it way back when. Voters disagreed, worried about billions in lost revenue for schools and cities. Well, the realtors are back again with pretty much the same idea, but they have a new twist on how to pay for it.
This is still our house!
Right now, Californians can inherit homes from their parents, rent them, and still pay their parents' low property tax rates. It's why actor Jeff Bridges was probably paying less than you in property taxes on the Malibu estate he inherited. Prop 19 would close the Lebowski loophole, generating hundreds of millions in tax revenue. Firefighters would get a big cut of those dollars. Opponents say it's a special interest giveaway to realtors to boost commissions. So vote yes if you think older Californians should keep their low property taxes when they move. Vote no if you think they shouldn't, and that Californians should not have to pay higher taxes for what they inherit. For more on Prop 19 and everything else on your ballot, go to calmatters.org.
Okay, so that was obviously not Ben Christopher. That was Matt Levin, who is on vacation this week. So Ben Christopher is taking his place in our presentation.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of look like Matt, so I think it's a good trade. So about Prop 19. So I think, as you can tell, this is kind of, we've been calling it the Frankenstein's monster propositions, and that's because, as Matt was explaining in the video, it's this product of all this kind of haggling and compromise. And so the first component that he really started with, and is arguably the main component, is that provision that lets older homeowners and homeowners who are disabled and those who are victims of natural disaster to move and take a portion of their low property tax assessment with them, is basically taking their Prop 15 tax break with them. Because under current law, if you move and buy a new house, the property tax payment that you owe resets to the value of the new home. And so for years, the California realtors in particular have been arguing that this basically creates a disincentive that kind of traps older homeowners, and particularly like empty nesters, in homes that are larger than what they actually need. And so if you're a young family and you're looking for a house with some more space for your kids, it would be, wouldn't be helpful, the realtors are arguing, to make it easier for those old homeowners to move out and find a smaller condo or something, and for the new families to move in, and to kind of facilitate that churn. And so this is I should point out that if this sounds familiar, this is actually already allowed in certain counties and in certain circumstances. So if someone is moving to a lower value home or within a particular county or between counties who have an agreement, that's allowed, but this would make this kind of a more universal kind of tax break. And so the realtors have basically been pushing for this for a while. This is their big goal here. That's why this policy is on the ballot. It's worth pointing out that realtors are in the business of buying and selling homes. So obviously they're not doing this out of the kindness of their heart. They have a financial stake in this. But there are these other components that Matt mentioned that were added onto the measure in order to win over some of the opponents from the 2018, or who opposed the 2018 version. And so one addition is to close what's called that Lebowski loophole, specifically for people who inherit a home. They would no longer be able to keep their parents or their grandparents' low tax assessment unless they're using it as a principal residence. And even then, only on the I think the first $1 million between the assessed value and the market value of the new home, so of the home currently. So basically, the target of that provision is people who inherit homes from their parents and grandparents and then use it as a rental property. So if Prop 19 passes, it would raise taxes on those property owners. And then there's this third component: any additional revenue raised by the measure, which the LAO estimates to be about $1 billion. Would go to state funds to support wildfire fighting, which you have to imagine these days is probably a wise political choice to add that in. So, so in summary, you have this like long-term goal of realtors and presumably many older property owners that was mashed together with these other two like loosely related policies to win over firefighters, to quell opposition from teachers and teachers unions and local governments who opposed the last version of this. And it does seem, at least so far, I haven't seen any very good polling about this, but the political calculation does seem to be a wise one, in that the California Teachers Association, which fiercely opposed Prop 5 in 2018, sorry, that's a phone going off. They now are neutral on it, and the California Democratic Party, which again opposed Prop 5, are now for it. And at the moment, the financing is pretty lopsided. You have $35 million yes, and something like $23,000 no, which is not a lot. And so, and also just like money aside, I think in California, if you have the teachers and the Democratic Party and Governor Newsom and the realtors and the firefighters on the same side, it's a pretty good camp to be in, I think. So.
Great, thank you, Ben. And sure. You know, just about the questions, you know, keep them coming. You know, even if we passed up the proposition, we'll either jump back or actually I can tell the reporter to answer the questions in the chat as well. So just anything that comes up, please put it there, and we'll keep an eye on it. And so next we're going to have another housing measure, and Ben is going to do double duty for us. He's going to talk about Proposition 15 next, which is called the split roll measure, which is also about Proposition 13.
Remember 1978? California's home prices were soaring. Some homeowners, led by this guy, were mad as hell about their ever-increasing property taxes. So voters passed Prop 13, and Californians have been busy voting on property taxes ever since. Over the last 4 decades, Californians have passed more than 20 ballot measures adding new rules for how homes and other properties are taxed. 2020 is no different, but Prop 15, also known as split roll, is the big one. If it passes, it will be the biggest change to California's tax system in a generation. Let me explain.
Hi, I'm Ben Christopher. I'm a political reporter with CalMatters, and I'm going to explain Prop 15 in a minute.
Properties used to be taxed based on the current home price. If a house's value doubled, so did the taxes. Then voters put a stop to that. Under Prop 13, properties are taxed based on their original purchase price. The longer you stay in your home, the larger the tax break. That also applies to commercial properties, which leads us to Prop 15. Prop 15 splits homes from commercial properties, putting them on different tax rolls, hence split roll. If it passes, nothing changes for homeowners, but lots of commercial landlords would be stripped of their Prop 13 protections and will probably have to start paying a lot more. Not so for small businesses and farms. They're exempt. Supporters say this is a great way to provide more funding to cash-strapped schools and local governments, and that large corporations will pay the most. Opponents say this would be one of the largest tax increases ever, and they warn that landlords will pass the higher costs on to their tenants, which might be small businesses. So, Vote yes if you want commercial properties to be taxed based on today's mostly higher market prices. Vote no if you want to keep things the way they are. For more on the 2020 election and everything else about California's politics, go to calmatters.org.
All right, it's me again. So, I hesitate to say that this is the most contentious issue on the 2020 ballot because there are a lot of really controversial issues on the 2020 ballot, but this has definitely got to be in the top three. And you can see that just in the array of very powerful interest groups who have lined up on both sides of this. So on the yes side, you have the California Teachers Association, the SEIU, you have the Democratic Party of California, you have the governor, you have Kamala Harris, you even have Joe Biden. So I think, split roll has been one of these progressive wish list items going back decades. And because for liberals in California and public sector unions and teachers who want to see some of the funding that went away with Prop 13 sort of filled back in, they can't attack Prop 13 directly because even among homeowners in California, even very liberal homeowners, it's still a very popular tax break according to any recent polling you see about it. So, but targeting businesses and particularly framing it in such a way where you're targeting large businesses is seen as a much more, I think, politically palatable thing to do in California, and so doing so would also, as I mentioned, raise quite a bit of money. So the Yes on 15 campaign has really gone out of its way to try to craft this measure in such a way as to be able to frame it as sort of a 99% against the 1% kind of thing. So again, it only applies to commercial and industrial property, but it also exempts small property owners, meaning those who own $3 million in property or less. I've gotten a lot of angry emails from some business owners in LA and the Bay Area who say $3 million, that's nothing, but that is the cutoff. Also, farm land would be exempt, and that was in an effort to win over agricultural interests, although that didn't work. Big Ag is actually opposed to it because things that aren't land would not be exempt, like farms and buildings and things like that. On the other side, obviously large businesses are not particularly enthusiastic about this whole idea. So you have some very large corporations based in California, particularly large commercial real estate companies who are very opposed and have been willing to spend quite a lot of money to fight Prop 15, as well as groups like the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, who are, position themselves as the defender of Prop 13 in California. And so, of course, they're opposing this as well. And so if you look at the money, on the yes side, there's about, last I checked, there's $41 million. On the no side, there's $30 million. So we're, even in California, that's quite a lot of money. And I think, prior to the pandemic, the Yes on 15 side were really feeling fairly confident that they could frame this entire debate as sort of an inequality debate, sort of the large faceless corporations against everyone else in California. And now it seems they're leaning a bit more into, hey, we're in this cataclysmic recession, schools and counties and cities are going broke right now, so we could really use that additional $6.5 to $11.5 billion. And then on the other side, the argument is mostly, okay, maybe you think you're targeting big businesses, but this is going to be, trickle down, and landlords are going to pass along the higher cost of their tenants or their customers. And is this really what you want to do in the middle of a giant recession? And so there have been this is one of the more well-polled propositions. So we had just this week, PPIC poll had 51% of respondents said that they supported it to 40, and then 9% undecided. And then yesterday, I think it was, UC Berkeley IGS poll put it at 49 yes, 34 no, and 17% undecided. So I think, you'd probably rather be on the yes camp than the no camp, politically speaking, but there's still a lot of undecided, and it's obviously a very contentious issue.
So thanks, Ben.
Sure.
Here's a question. Tell me, it's about how likely is it that landlords can pass on their higher taxes to tenants in rent? And is there any protection for tenants in matters like this? Is there would this apply to a landlord who has tenants that would inherit if they move?
So there are some protections in that if the property that the landlord owns is sort of the tenants are at least 50% of the tenants are considered small businesses under that definition, then there would be a slower phase in. Obviously, the tax itself is levied directly on the property owner, and so there is a debate. I'm actually going to be writing a story about it, and hopefully it'll go up tomorrow morning, about this very debate about where you have a lot of small businesses, and I get lots of emails from them saying like, hey, I'm not going to be legally subject to this tax because I'm just a tenant. But look, I have a triple net lease, meaning that I pay the property tax for my landlord, and so I'm going to be paying any increase in this. And then you have the other side where they've lined up a bunch of pretty heavy-hitting economists from UC Berkeley and like Joseph Stiglitz and from Columbia, who are basically saying like, maybe in the short term there will be some adjustments, but in a competitive market, commercial landlords are going to only be able to charge what the market can bear. And so particularly if you have some landlords who are having their taxes increase and some who aren't, you can't just, pass the entirety of that cost along unless you want your tenants to go elsewhere. So that's the debate. It's a little bit Econ 101-y, abstract, but that's it.
Thank you. So you come out at CalMatters tomorrow.
Good plug. Yeah.
So the next proposition we're going to do is another one about housing. It's Proposition 21. It's a rent control measure, and we're going to hear from our inequality reporter, Jackie Botts.
This fall, you'll start going through your ballot and see rent control. Sound familiar? There's my colleague, Matt, talking about the same proposal back in 2018. 59% of Californians voted against it. So I'm sure you're wondering, what's new this time? I'll explain.
Hi, I'm Jackie Botts, and I cover economic inequality for CalMatters. I'll explain Prop 21 in under a minute.
California renters typically pay 70% more than renters in other states. It's one of the big reasons nearly 150,000 Californians are unhoused. Last year, California lawmakers passed a state law capping yearly rent increases at around 8% for most housing. Some people think the state law doesn't go far enough, which brings us to Prop 21. Some cities have their own rent control laws, but their power is limited. For example, cities can't enact rent control laws for single-family homes. But Prop 21 would allow cities to enact stricter rent control for almost all rental housing, as long as it's more than 15 years old. Supporters say this will prevent more homelessness and gentrification. Opponents say stricter local rent control will make it unprofitable for landlords to build more housing, which we so desperately need. Plus, California voters already nixed this idea in 2018. On the other hand, the pandemic's financial shock could make people more eager to protect renters. Vote yes on Prop 21 if you want your city to be able to expand rent control. Vote no on Prop 21 if you don't. For more information on Prop 21 and everything on the November ballot, visit calmatters.org.
Jackie.
So, in essence, this initiative would say that cities would be able to pass rent control on almost all housing as long as it's more than 15 years old. The big exception would be mom and pop landlords who own 2 or fewer single family properties, which includes the property they live in. Let me share a bit more about the stories that are being told on both sides of this. So the narrative of the Prop 21 campaign takes aim at corporate landlords who make big bucks off of powerless tenants and can change the faces of neighborhoods by raising the rent, pushing out old tenants, bringing in higher paying new tenants, and all the while increasing homelessness. And they say cities need all the tools that they can get to regulate those Goliaths in a David versus Goliath sort of situation. There are some very high profile political folks who support this. Bernie, US Rep Maxine Waters, the California Democratic Party. The biggest character of all who's supporting this is Michael Weinstein. He's president of the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. He's sort of a controversial firebrand character in California politics. His is a health organization, but it has increasingly stepped into advocacy, spending millions on state and local ballot drives over the past 8 years. He backed and funded Prop 10 in 2018, the similar rent control model that failed, and now he's back with this more moderate version. The opposition is a lot of associations that represent construction, builders, landlords. It also includes real estate corporations and some senior advocacy groups and the California NAACP State Conference. Perhaps the most important recent installment in the Prop 21 battle is a new prominent character in opposition. Governor Gavin Newsom announced his opposition not long ago, and what he said sums up the arguments against pretty well. He said, last year's statewide rent control law goes far enough. And he said that Proposition 21, like Proposition 10 before it, runs the all too real risk of discouraging availability of affordable housing in our state. So opponents say, look, it's so expensive to live in California because it's so expensive to build in California, and we have a severe shortage of housing units. If we further limit the revenue that builders and landlords can get, then they'll be discouraged from investing in new housing. And in the big picture, it's just going to be worse for low-income tenants. And plus, they say voters already rejected this 2 years ago. You might be wondering why Newsom is going against his own party. Probably because last year's rent control law was a result of tough negotiations with the real estate lobby. It was seen as a middle ground and a buffer to actually repealing the 1995 law that restricts rent control, Costa-Hawkins. So Newsom might be seen as acting in bad faith by real estate lobbies if he were to back this. And plus, producing a lot more housing has been one of his goals, one of his big promises since he became governor. So economists say more rent control could slow that down, and that's not in line with his campaign promise. You might be wondering what the ground truth is here, because on both sides they're saying that that their side will help low-income tenants. So will rent control help low-income tenants or hurt them? To be sure, rent control is a balancing act. Too much rent control will undeniably further restrict building in a free market economy if there aren't other interventions. And on the other hand, gentrification and displacement are undeniable trends right now in big cities. And corporate landlords certainly have changed neighborhoods while making big profits. So if we are to look at the studies, it's also mixed. One UC Berkeley study of survey of studies found that in the Bay Area, there's evidence that local rent control laws have slowed construction. A Stanford study found that rent control decreased the housing stock in San Francisco, but also provided more stability to low-income tenants. A USC study of studies on rent control found very mixed evidence. In some cases, they found rent control had actually driven overall housing prices down. So it depends on what the local rent control laws are that are actually passed, and if there are other interventions that are passed alongside them. In general, economists don't like expanded rent control, but experts from other fields, sociology, for example, will say it's beneficial. There's a lot of money going into this one. The opposition is outfunding the proponents by a long shot, $43 million to $23 million. That's mostly big real estate investors. And given that funding imbalance and recent polls, it would appear a losing battle. A poll came out yesterday that found that just 37% of likely voters are supporting Proposition 21. That's fewer than voted for it in 2018. There are still 26% who are undecided, but that's a pretty tough hurdle in getting those undecided voters on their side by November.
Great. Thank you very much, Jackie. Like I said, if there's any questions, please put them in the chat. And now we'll move, those are the three housing measures. Now we're going to move to the one measure about voting. I'm sorry. It's about Proposition 18. And it's about allowing 17-year-olds to vote. And we'll hear from our youth and child reporter, Elizabeth Aguilera.
Kids today, there's TikTok and iPhones, Instagram and virtual graduations. And soon, there may be voting. Voting among young people is pretty abysmal. Proposition 18 aims to change that by giving them buy-in earlier in the process and allowing more of them to vote sooner.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Aguilera, CalMatters Child and Youth Issues reporter, and this is what you need to know about Proposition 18 in under a minute.
Prop 18 would allow eligible 17-year-olds to vote in primary and special elections if they will be 18 by the general election. Democratic lawmakers put Prop 18 on the ballot. It has to go before the voters because it will amend the Constitution. Supporters say many 17-year-olds already work and pay taxes, and this would get them involved in voting at the beginning of an election cycle. They say it could also boost youth voting overall. Opponents say 17-year-olds are not worldly enough to vote and say they are still too influenced by their parents and school teachers to be objective voters. So vote yes if you want eligible 17-year-olds to get a jump start on the voting process. Vote no if you want to keep things as they are. Voting starts at 18, period. For more information on Prop 18 and everything on the November ballot, visit calmatters.org.
Thank you. Elizabeth?
Hi. So this is not one of the hotly contested propositions, but it has to go before the voters because it would amend the Constitution. So Prop 18 was put on the ballot by the state legislature, and the majority of lawmakers support allowing 17-year-olds to vote, but of course need California voters to approve the change. This is the 6th time the state legislature has put this, has taken up this issue, but the first time it's actually made it to the ballot to go before the voters. So as you heard in the video, supporters say many youth already work and pay taxes, and that many public policy decisions like employment initiatives, affordable housing, and educational funding directly impact young people, and so say that they should be able to weigh in sooner in the process. Historically, youth have the lowest turnout among voters, and supporters of the proposition say that getting them interested in voting earlier could help improve those numbers. Studies show that once a person votes, they're likely to do so again, and getting involved earlier in the process may help them be more engaged in the process. The California Association of Student Councils and the League of Women Voters have endorsed the proposition. Opposition in Sacramento fell along party lines, with Republicans mostly voting against it across the board. Those who oppose the proposition say that 17-year-olds are still too young and mostly influenced by their parents and teachers to be objective voters. The Election Integrity Project California is also against the bill, but there hasn't been any official opposition registered with the Secretary of State's office. Nationally, at least 18 other states and the District of Columbia already allow 17-year-olds to vote early if they will be of age by the general election. So California is trying to follow along with those other states. And if it passes, the state estimates it could cost up to $1 million at the county level every 2 years, for ballot materials, for making sure that all the rules are correct for registration. Statewide, the costs are expected to be in the hundreds of thousands, but those will only be one-time expenses. So far, supporters have raised about $260,000, and no committees have filed their official opposition. So it doesn't look like there's any money been raised to oppose this. Both the LA Times and the San Francisco Chronicle support the measure along with many other state papers, but the Orange County Register actually is opposed to it. This is the latest effort to reach young voters to help create a lifelong habit of voting. Previous previous proposals include allowing folks to register when they get driver's license, and then also allowing youth as young as 16 to pre-register to vote so that when they turn 18, they're automatically registered. So this is one other step in getting young people to the polls.
Great. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. It looks like there's some people who are sending questions straight to the reporters, which is great. And then I think the reporters will just answer in the chat so everybody can see it. Otherwise, if you send one to me, like I said, we'll add a question into the conversation here. So thank you, Elizabeth. So now we are amazingly right on schedule. This was all an assumption and a guess, but we're right on target. We are now going to move to our third segment of 4 ballot measures, and this one, it has 2 regarding the gig economy and the tech industry, and then 2 about healthcare. So the first one is, one of the biggest. I think 15 and 22 are probably 2 of the biggest measures that'll be on the ballot. This is Proposition 22, which is already the most expensive in California history, and we're going to hear from our economy reporter, Lauren Hepler.
For California gig workers, the last few years have involved a lot of driving in circles. Uber and Lyft drivers have organized protests and honked their horns over a new state law that was supposed to change how they get paid. Now, they're back in the middle of another big money battle.
I'm CalMatters economy reporter Lauren Hepler, and this is what you need to know about Prop 22 in under a minute.
California's new labor law was supposed to reclassify thousands of contract workers as employees, giving them higher pay, health care, and family leave. but companies like Uber and Lyft haven't complied. They've threatened to shut down and say the law would force them to cut jobs and raise prices. Instead, the gig companies want voters' help rewriting the rules with Prop 22. It would offer workers a few new benefits, but not as many as the state law. Gig companies kicked off their campaign with more than $100 million and have kept adding since. Labor groups are fighting back. They say the pandemic is a prime example of why drivers need the stronger protections of current laws, not this milder alternative. Vote yes on Prop 22 to allow gig companies to limit contractors' benefits. Vote no if you think gig companies should treat and pay drivers like employees. Remember, there are already lawsuits flying over gig worker rules, so it could be a bumpy road to Election Day. For more information on Prop 22 and everything on the November ballot, visit calmatters.org.
All right, so this one, even since this video was produced very recently, has gotten a lot more contentious and a lot more expensive. So just this month, Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, and Instacart, the major backers of the measure, have added $17.5 million each. So we're up to a grand total of $184 million in support of Prop 22, which, like Dave said, has shattered the records for the most expensive ballot measure ever in the state. And that compares to about $5 million that labor groups have spent against Prop 22 so far. Polling on the issue is fairly split. The UC Berkeley poll that just came out this month found 39% of people, of likely voters, in support, 36% opposed, and 25% still undecided. So we're going to keep seeing lots of jockeying. And for anyone else who's ever used any of these services, I'm sure that means you might have seen some of this material coming through your inbox. A lot of the emails that companies like Lyft are sending frame it as protecting drivers' freedom. And I'll get into some of the questions about exactly how drivers operate within these companies in a second. But in terms of the supporters and opposition, a broad range of supporters have lined up behind the measure with the gig companies. The California NAACP, the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, the California Police Chiefs Association, and newspapers like the San Francisco Chronicle support Prop 22. They say you shouldn't stifle the gig economy, especially with unemployment now above 11%. So the coronavirus pandemic obviously sort of changing the economic calculus for some people. Opponents say absolutely not. It's the other way around. The pandemic shows that our work situations are too fragile and that workers need more of a safety net. So the major opponents are the big labor unions like SEIU, California Labor Federation, but also this interesting new class of gig worker advocacy groups like Gig Workers Rising and Rideshare Drivers United. And the LA Times also just came out in opposition to Prop 22. And they say, all of these groups kind of collectively say that companies are unfairly trying to buy their way out of labor regulations that now apply to all other sorts of industries after last year's AB5 ruling on contract versus full-time employment. So that's kind of the crux of that issue. When it comes to big name politicians, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris both oppose Prop 22. Gavin Newsom has been conspicuously silent on the issue. I wanted to talk about two main points, because I've been talking to drivers about this issue since last year when we had kind of the AB5 controversy. And it really comes down to how much they work in terms of whether they support or oppose Prop 22. Those who are logging 60, 70 hours a week on different gig platforms or with one company in particular say that, of course, they should be getting full-time benefits. They're like really driving themselves into the ground, sometimes literally, to make ends meet, and they need more stability in things like family leave, overtime pay, compensation for the wear and tear they're putting on their cars. But surveys touted by the companies say that drivers prefer the measures 4-to-1, and those that I've spoken to who are in support of Prop 22 tend to be part-timers. They really are using this as a flexible way to earn cash. Like retirees are a group that I've talked to a lot about this. So they maybe already have a pension, but this is great for spending cash or for their kids or other things. So we're really talking about different types of workers. That's one of the challenges with gig work. It's this word that's become really popular, but it encompasses such a broad swath of workers. And the tricky thing, though, is that the companies do own the data about how much drivers are working, which makes it hard to know definitively how many fall into each camp. And the numbers are constantly changing because by definition, people can log on one day, log off the next. So it is a tricky thing to get down. The other thing that has really started to come up in the last couple of weeks is that there's a very high threshold to change this law later. If it does pass, it would require a 7/8 majority, which is very, very high. That's not a common provision of state ballot measures, and politically would be pretty much impossible to get 7/8 of the California legislature to agree on anything. So the labor groups, again, are saying, whoa, 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 we should not be rushing into a permanent sort of regulatory exemption for gig companies. And the companies are saying, we really need this because our business models would be shot without it. Prices are going to go up for consumers, and tens of thousands of drivers are going to lose their jobs. So that's where we are in this very, very controversial measure.
Great. Hey, this is a big one. A couple of questions, Lauren. So one is about the alignment between this measure and federal IRS tax law. Doesn't the question asks if, doesn't the ultimate determination of independent contractors versus employees, isn't that a matter of federal tax law, no matter what the state says? And how is this supposed to work if it's just in connection with state income tax?
So there's a layer beyond taxes. That's a good point. And for sure, there's a lot of people that are looking to the federal government for more guidance, and this administration has not made it a priority other than the temporary pandemic unemployment assistance program, which in California or across the country allowed drivers to apply for unemployment benefits when they otherwise would not have been able to, because the gig companies don't pay into unemployment insurance like other employers. But the other thing that's very important in comparing the state and federal perspectives is the labor protections. There's a lot of categories in which California has stronger protections for workers than other states. So you can think about things in other areas like LGBTQ worker protections and things like that. And in this case, we would be talking about state level clarification of when you have to be paid overtime and when you need to have family leave. So it's those kinds of assurances that are really front and center.
Great. And another quick one about, has there been any discussion about this proposition applying only to full-time employees versus everybody?
That's the tricky thing. So as written now, no, there's not a distinction. But again, in my interviews, that is a really tricky thing. That's what voters are going to have to kind of decide without a ton of information, unfortunately.
And why such a high bar to overturn this?
It's a good question. We are also looking into that for a potential story. Like you said, it's unusually high. And the skeptics I've talked to, the people who are politically savvy, thinking about why that might be, is that gig companies are putting a lot of money into this. They don't want to put this much money, record-breaking amounts of money, into something that can then be overturned. Like we've heard my colleagues talking about all these things that kind of ping pong around from year to year. The gig companies do not want that to happen, is what some people who are more sort of skeptical of their political motivations say.
Great, and I might mention next week, Lauren is going to moderate a debate on this measure with Lorena Gonzalez, the Assemblywoman who passed AB 5, and the proponents of Prop 22. So you can tune into that at the Voice of San Diego PolitiFest next weekend. So our next proposition is also a very big one, technology related. It's Proposition 24, and it's about data and consumer privacy. And we're going to hear from our Capitol reporter, Laurel Rosenhall.
Most fights over data privacy shape up like this. Big tech on one side, privacy advocates on the other. But the privacy fight on your ballot this year? It's complicated. 2 years ago, California passed the first data privacy law in the nation. Now you can ask businesses for all the information they have about you and tell them not to sell your data. But the man who pushed for that law after a dinner party conversation with a Google engineer says it's not strong enough. So he put Prop 24 on your ballot.
Hi, I'm Laurel Rosenhall, political reporter with CalMatters, and I'm going to explain Prop 24 in less than a minute.
Prop 24 would change California's privacy law in several ways. It would let you tell businesses to limit the use of sensitive data, such as your exact location and health info, stop businesses from holding onto your data for longer than necessary, triple the fine on companies that violate children's privacy rights, and create a new state agency to enforce the privacy law. Privacy advocates who supported the law 2 years ago are split over this measure. On one side, Alistair McTaggart, the Bay Area real estate developer who pushed for the first privacy law, has spent more than $4 million on Prop 24. On the other side, several privacy advocates say Prop 24 would actually hurt consumers by delaying a rule in the existing law and by allowing tech companies to grab your data when you leave the state. The tech industry? It could just sit this one out and let privacy advocates fight among themselves. So, vote yes if you want to change California's privacy law, and vote no if you don't. Learn more about this proposition and others at calmatters.org. For CalMatters,
I'm Laurel Rosenhall.
Okay, Laurel?
Hi. So since we made the video, there's been a number of endorsements on both sides that I wanted to bring to your attention. On the yes side, Ro Khanna, the congressman, the Democratic congressman from the Silicon Valley area, is supporting it, and so is Andrew Yang, the former presidential candidate. On the no side, the League of Women Voters and the Courage Campaign, which is a sort of progressive campaign organization, and several progressive Democratic clubs throughout the state are also opposing it. But what's probably most interesting on this measure is who you're not hearing from in the campaign and who you probably won't hear much from before you vote on this. The tech industry is a real wild card. They did testify against this measure when it was being heard in the legislature, but they also consulted with Alistair McTaggart when he was crafting this measure behind the scenes. That was not a public process that he went through when he wrote the language that's on this measure. So I think it's highly unlikely that they will weigh in on this and make a public position. And similar, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which is obviously one of the preeminent privacy advocates, they have decided to remain neutral. They looked at all of the details of this very complicated ballot measure. It's more than 50 pages long. And they basically decided there are some things in there that they thought would be good for privacy, some things that would be bad for privacy. And basically in the end, it was kind of a wash. And so they are remaining neutral. There's also a bit of a meta argument behind this ballot measure, and that has to do with who should make decisions about these complicated laws for our state, voters or lawmakers. You know, McTaggart, who's funding this, he says it's needed because after passing the law in the legislature, all these lobbyists swarmed the Capitol over the last year and tried to change the privacy measure that was passed in 2018. That's true, but the legislature did kill most of those attempts to change the law, and there were also changes coming from the privacy side as well. ACLU was sponsoring bills and whatnot. So on the one hand, you know, neither process is really perfect, right? Like you go through the legislature and you have the possibility that lobbyists are going to influence the outcome. And, but you also have a public process where people can kind of watch how things evolve and change and make the case as a policy evolves. You go to the ballot, you let the people decide, you have direct democracy, but voters are then left with really complicated policy questions like privacy, which, you know, we're the first state in the nation that's really doing anything to this extent. And it's kind of a lot to put on a bunch of ordinary people who don't know that much about privacy. The final point is that there's been some editorials. The Mercury News is a no. The Los Angeles Times is a yes. And Governor Newsom has not stated a position on this one at all.
Great. Thank you very much, Laurel. Yeah, that is going to be one to watch, and a little bit surprising. It's not more prominent than it is, but it'll, like others, though, this will ripple nationally. So the last two of our propositions are about healthcare, and the one we'll do next is Proposition 14. It's a measure about stem cell research. The video you'll hear from Veranda Lyons, who, by the way, did all of our videos. She's our video reporter, videographer. And we'll hear afterwards from our health reporter, Barbara Feder-Ostrov.
2004 was the year of promise for stem cell research using human embryos.
To vote yes on Proposition 71, the Stem Cell Research Initiative.
A human being begins as an embryo made up of a starter kit of stem cells. Embryonic stem cells are blank slates, not yet specialized, and thus uniquely useful to researchers. When scientists learned how to remove stem cells from human embryos, it became a flashpoint in American politics. The ethical objection: researchers destroy lab-created human embryos for in vitro fertilization to retrieve embryonic stem cells and their life-saving potential. The federal government stopped research on newly created embryonic stem cell lines. California voters responded, touting possible cures for paralysis, Parkinson's, and other diseases. Californians put $3 billion towards stem cell research. Now, voters are being asked to fund more stem cell research. This time, it's Prop 14. Hi, I'm Beronda Lyons, video journalist for CalMatters, and I'm explaining Proposition 14 in less than a minute. In 2001, then-President George W. Bush banned federal funding for research using newly created embryonic stem cell lines. In a backlash, California voters approved a state bond measure to fund stem cell research and create the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine. Bonds are loans. The state borrows money from investors, and taxpayers pay it back over time with interest. In the past 14 years, the agency has funded 64 clinical trials and more than 3,000 scientific articles about stem cell research. Now, the agency is running out of money and asking voters for another $5.5 billion. The money would pay for more research, medical training, and building research facilities. Supporters say the institute needs more money to keep working towards cures for diseases. Opponents say there is no longer federal limits on stem cell research, which was the whole genesis of the state getting involved anyway. Vote yes if you want California to keep funding stem cell research. Vote no if you don't. Learn more about these propositions and others at calmatters.org. For CalMatters, I'm Beronda Lyons.
So the question for California voters this year is, should the state keep supporting stem cell research with tax dollars? The money would go to the state's program, which is called the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine, to give out as grants, mostly to California universities and companies. Prop 14 is kind of a referendum on how well the state has done in spending all that money. And on that subject, there are mixed reviews. Observers say it's definitely helped California become a magnet for advanced genetic research. And there have been advances in basic science, and one stem cell treatment for children with the bubble baby disease is expected to be approved by the FDA next year. But no other treatments have yet come to market after 14 years. And the original need for California to step up, a George Bush era ban on federal money for stem cell research, no longer exists. So the same authors of Prop 71, which was passed in 2004, back for even more money. This time they're asking for $5.5 billion, but taxpayers would have to pay up to $7.8 billion over 30 years if you include all the interest. This time there's still little offered to boost legislative oversight of what's a huge sum of taxpayer money. And $1.5 billion of this pot of money would be reserved for research on brain and nervous system diseases like Alzheimer's. It's a lot of money, and some opponents of the bill say it's way too much during a pandemic that has hit California's state budget particularly hard. They also say there's not a need for taxpayers to finance stem cell research as federal funding's been restored, and more importantly, venture capitalists are pouring billions each year into the regenerative medicine sector. On the other hand, an economic study by USC researchers that was released this summer found that the $3 billion from Prop 71 created more than 50,000 jobs and added about $10 billion to the state's economy. The supporters of Proposition 14 include California's Governor, Gavin Newsom, California Institute for Regenerative Medicine, the regents of the University of California, patient groups like the March of Dimes, and some local politicians and chambers of commerce. These supporters have spent nearly $7 million to get Prop 14 passed. The opponents, which have spent precisely nothing, include one member of the Institute's board and a nonprofit that advocates for privacy in genetic research. They say it's too much money and that there's no attempt to redress the conflicts of interest that have cropped up after Prop 71 was first passed. In the end, of course, the voters will decide.
Excellent. Thank you. So a quick question. Neil, you had a question, it sounds like.
There's an overall question. Dave, given your advanced number of years covering Sacramento politics, you might be the best one to answer. Said with love. In a number of these conversations, people have cited poll results that have a lot of folks undecided. We're a month away from the election and 40 days away, and the ballots are being mailed soon. Is that unusual to have this many people undecided at this point? Is it just because the propositions are so complicated?
Yeah, no, it's really pretty typical at this point. A lot of people don't look at the ballot till the last week or two or even days. But pretty much when you see, you can expect that the undecideds really break the same way that those who have already decided break. There's rarely much variation from that. So, if something is far behind, it's a steep hill to come back. I mean, I do think, if Prop 22, I think, what is a 29% approval or support, I think? Lauren, is that right? If that came back and won, that would be a huge flip. I mean, compared to what's happened in the past with initiatives in general.
Prop 22 is actually one of the close ones. Prop 22 is at 39% yes, 36 no, 25% undecided. So keep watching that one.
Yeah. So one last measure, a healthcare measure. This is Proposition 23 about kidney dialysis, and we're going to hear from another of our health team, Ana Ibarra.
They say if at first you don't succeed, try again. And that's what One Health Workers Union is doing. 2 years ago, Californians voted against a ballot measure that would have limited the profits of kidney dialysis companies. Fast forward, Californians are now being asked to vote on yet another dialysis proposition.
Hi, I'm CalMatters health reporter Ana Ibarra, and this is Prop 23 in a minute.
Prop 23 is not so much about capping profits as it is about adding regulations, although these may come at a cost to clinics, which serve about 80,000 Californians with kidney failure. The measure would require clinics to have at least one physician on site during operating hours. It would also mandate that clinics report infection data to the state, get state approval before closing a clinic, and prohibit clinics from discriminating against patients based on their insurance type. Supporters, led by the labor union SEIU United Health Workers, say dialysis companies need to be held accountable and that the proposed requirements would improve patient services. Opponents, led by dialysis companies, argue this is another attempt by the labor group to pressure clinics and unionize dialysis workers. Plus, they say clinics already have the necessary medical staff on site. Hiring additional doctors would raise clinic costs, leading some clinics to cut their hours or shut down, stranding people who need dialysis treatment to survive. So vote yes if you want the state to add more requirements for dialysis clinics. Vote no if you don't.
Hi, so SEIU has tried to take on dialysis companies for many years now, not only through past ballot measures like you heard in the video, but also through legislation. In 2017, SEIU was behind a bill that would have set minimum staffing ratios in dialysis clinics, but that bill didn't go anywhere. I did want to talk a bit about the main point of contention on this measure, and that's this proposal of having a physician on site at all times. SEIU argues that because dialysis treatment is a high-risk procedure, having a doctor on site at all times really is the safest way to go about providing this treatment, in case of an emergency. Clinics do currently have a medical director, but that doctor isn't required to be there all the time. So the state's doctor lobby, the California Medical Association, has come out against this measure with the argument that this could actually worsen California's provider shortage. So if you have close to 600 dialysis clinics in the state and you need a physician or two for each one, well, that adds a lot of pressure to finding those doctors, and it also creates competition for other health facilities to find providers. So Yes on Prop 23 has been endorsed by the California Labor Federation and the state's Democratic Party. SEIU has raised more than $6 million so far. Meanwhile, the campaign in opposition has raised over $93 million, and that's mostly funded by dialysis companies like DaVita and Fresenius, which own the majority of dialysis clinics in California. So health initiatives usually do make for expensive fights. So for some background, when Prop 8, the 2018 dialysis measure, was at play, dialysis companies and their campaign raised $111 million to defeat that initiative. And most large newspaper editorials have also written against the proposition. The LA Times has said that this measure doesn't really make for enough or real meaningful improvements, but can increase health costs. And in talking to patient advocates and patients, that's definitely a concern. Meanwhile, the SF Chronicles board has called this an ugly labor dispute and just leaving patients in the middle. The governor hasn't taken a position on this measure.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm sorry. Thank you, Anna. I'm looking at a message from Elizabeth. Well, so we've gone through our 12 propositions. I hope we helped everybody understand how they want to vote on the ballot. I want to say a big thank you to our whole team. It was our first try at going through a 90-minute presentation on 12 ballot measures, and everybody was there, the technology worked, and we got the information out. Just one quick, if there's any more questions, please feel free to message me. I'm at dave@calmatters.org, or you can also message the reporters. Most of our emails are just first name @calmatters.org. So thank you very much. And Neil, let's turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, David, and thanks to everybody, and especially thanks to our host at the Battery and Colleen for producing this. As I mentioned before, we are a nonprofit news organization. We have a daily newsletter that comes out every day. It's where you can keep up on what all of these reporters and the other folks are doing. Love to have you subscribe to it if you don't get it already. Feel free to just email me, neil@calmatters.org, and we can get you signed up. And of course, we are supported by donations, and some folks who are members of the Battery are already supporting us. We would love to talk to you about ways you can help us out if you possibly can. This coverage is expensive, and we are the only ones doing it, especially around these propositions right now at such an important time and covering all of the recovery that's ahead for California. A few of us will be around for a while. We're going to keep the Zoom room open a little bit longer. If anybody wants to stay and ask any final questions, feel free. So great to see that so many people hung in the whole time. Hope you've got a sample ballot full of notes and are ready to vote. So with that, we'll thank you all and say goodnight. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Neil. Someone did ask if you guys have a tool on your website that go through all the props in addition to all of these videos. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, indeed. Go to calmatters.org. Thank you. And you'll see at the very top line, there's a link to our election guide. And if you go into that election guide at calmatters.org, you'll see a page about each proposition that has the video you just saw, plus a lot of background information, plus links to stories that we've done and other people have done on the propositions. And you'll see the same for some of the important state legislative races and congressional races.
And I will put the link in the chat here.
It's already there. Laurel beat you to it.
Laurel, yeah, Laurel and Lauren.
Great.
Put it in there. Well, just so everyone from in the audience knows, I've given you the ability to unmute yourself. So if you did want to ask a question audibly, you're not restricted to the chat now. But just so everyone knows, we will be following up this with some FAQs, more links, the recording from tonight, so you can revisit this, share it with your friends and family, and you can help everyone answer any questions. Personally, I find it's still so shocking that the younger people still are not voting. So I plan on sharing this with my friends and family with kids and all of that. So thank you all again so much for this. Unless anyone has any glaring questions, I think we can wrap it up after a really awesome 90 minutes. Thank you all so much for this.
Colleen, thank you. Something you said there, some people have told us they're going to be taking these videos and playing them for their family, for a group of friends, for a gathering of some kind on Zoom. getting together, watching all the videos, just talking about the propositions, which is a great way to get people engaged. And you're so right. The number of people who vote is nowhere near where it should be. So everybody talking to a couple of people and encouraging them to get educated is huge.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. Take care and have a good night.
Thanks.
Go vote.
Are you still leaving the chat room open?
We totally can. Yeah, absolutely. If anyone needs to drop off, you can.
I have a question. I just didn't want to ask it during the main session.
Please.
Since you said, I'm sorry, I have a mask on, I'm walking, it's like I'm off video. The question is about lobby money. Could anyone comment on whether it's labor unions or corporate lobby money at the state level in California? I'd be interested in hearing thoughts of any of you who cover Washington, Sacramento.
It's a good question for Laurel. Laurel, are you still with us?
I am. Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I mean, lobbying is a huge industry in Sacramento. The lobbying that happens in Sacramento is basically second only to what happens in Washington in terms of there's no other state that has, like nearly the volume of money that goes into lobbying. And there are lobbies of every flavor. So yes, like labor unions absolutely have a major lobbying presence, but so do chambers of commerce and other business associations. Obviously tech companies like Uber and Lyft have emerged as forces in recent years. Then you have your more sort of classic influence peddlers like the gambling tribes and the tobacco industry and things like that. So, absolutely insurance companies, health industry companies, I mean, basically everyone who is regulated by the government in any way spends a lot of money on lobbying. And then there are the sort of public interest lobbyists as well. Humane Society has a lobbyist, and Planned Parenthood has a lobbyist, and ACLU has a lobbyist. So there is a ton of lobbying in Sacramento, and the interplay between what happens in the legislature and then what happens on the ballot is sort of that's kind of like this long-term dance that plays out over many years, where when interest groups sort of can't get what they want from the legislature, they'll put it on the ballot, or sometimes they'll threaten to put something on the ballot as a way to try to leverage the legislature into doing that. So voters get sucked in. A lot of these things that we have to decide on seem so random and out of the blue, but the reality is they're all sort of they fit somewhere into this like longer evolution of these lobbying fights that, usually they intersect with Sacramento somewhere along the way. Does that help?
And do you keep, it does. I mean, it's unusual because we're so heavily Democrat. It's actually kind of why I'm curious about this in particular. Does CalMatter keep a log kind of over time of especially corporate and national labor union total donations? I always find it interesting to look at the by proposition measures, but I kind of want to understand what's the aggregate influence. Do you have any kind of summed up by year aggregate corporate cut of the data?
I don't have anything easily at my fingertips, although we do routinely cover how money, gets into politics, and lobbying is one way, and then spending on ballot measures is considered like a different bucket, and then spending on candidates is a different bucket. So it actually wouldn't be very easy to just kind of give $1 for some figure for each side, because they play in different ways. But it is something that we cover, and if you want to get into it more granular, I'd be happy to have a call with you, or if you want to send me an email, I can send you some links to some different resources. I'd be more than happy to share that with you.
Amazing. That'd be great. Thank you so much for taking the question.
Sure.
I'll follow up.
Yeah, that's an area where there's so much data out there, and we refer to it a lot for stories. We look up things when we have to, but we also know there's a great opportunity for us to do a better job of, and frankly, raise the money to support the effort to do a better job of cataloging all that stuff and making it more available for ourselves, for our reporting, and for the 40 million people in California who we hope will find it useful.
I just, this is Michael, who spoke about Prop 16. I wanted to point out that lobbying and special interest money does play a role in the funding for and against Prop 16, but I think something like 2/3 of the money raised by the Prop 16 side, the yes on Prop 16 side, isn't from special interests, but from very wealthy individual donors. So you had one person who contributed at least $5 million. She's a philanthropist. Steve Ballmer and his wife gave $1 million. The wife of the co-founder of Netflix gave $1 million. So that's individual contribution. So I think it's interesting that like some of these sort of mid-level priced propositions can be swung by the sheer will or deep pockets of individuals rather than lobbyists and unions and business groups.
Yeah, the paper that Michael Porter and Catherine Gell wrote this last year out of Harvard Business School, or Harvard generally, is interesting to talk about political entrepreneurs, which may need to be a whole kind of independent category of donors. Thank you.
And I would just add one other point, because you mentioned that seeming a little surprised by the corporate spending, given that we have such a Democratic legislature. One of the major trends in the California legislature over the last decade or so has been the corporate relationship being built with the Democrats. And so all of the business interests have realized that, Republicans are not going to win a majority in the legislature anytime soon. They're only are going to have this very small slice of the seats. And so for the business interests, it's really all about cultivating a block of moderate Democrats that might vote like Republicans on some issues. And so there is a ton of corporate money that supports the Democratic Party in California and has really kind of scrambled labor's lockhold that they had on Democratic politics for a long time. And so it's not that the corporate side wins every time. Labor still wins a lot of fights. But there is a real tension between labor and business among the Democratic caucuses, and Republicans are just kind of an afterthought because they're such a super duper minority.
Amazing. Thank you for addressing that and all of my queries. This was a great night. I appreciate all the work you all do.
Happy to help.
Yeah, thank you all. You are a wealth of resources and information on this and many topics. So if you all are interested, we did a talk with CalMatters about their state of, we did education and policing and police reform. We have that. We can share out the recording with that if you're interested, and we'll also be doing more programming with them, hopefully in the future after our election this November. So,
absolutely.
Thank you all again. We'll send a follow-up, and definitely, obviously, the reporters and the CalMatters team has made themselves available to answer more questions. So we'll say goodnight for now, so everyone can go on.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Colleen, thank you so much.
Thank you, Colleen.
Thank you. Bye-bye.